Somewhere below the empty rolling surface of the Philippine Sea lies Taiho, one of the most advanced purpose-built aircraft carriers completed by the Imperial Japanese Navy during the Second World War. Built around an armored flight deck unlike any earlier Japanese fleet carrier, she was a flagship of staggering proportions. Roughly 843 feet of flight deck, about 253 meters at waterline, and a deep load displacement in the 37,000-ton range. A ship that large, carrying aircraft, fuel, ordnance, and thousands of crewmen into the Pacific War, should have left an unmistakable footprint on the seabed. Yet no modern deep ocean survey has publicly identified the hull, and no publicly released sonar image has confirmed her final position. In an era when other famous Japanese carrier wrecks from Midway have been located, mapped, and photographed at extreme depth, Taiho remains an unconfirmed point on a blank nautical map more than 16,000 feet above the abyssal plain. That contradiction begins with the way the carrier died. Taiho was not destroyed by overwhelming enemy fire, tearing her hull apart from outside. A cascading internal failure turned the protected ship into a sealed fuel air chamber and left modern searchers facing a target whose final form is still unknown. The physical problem begins with Taiho's construction. Earlier Japanese fleet carriers had used unarmored wooden flight decks that were vulnerable to plunging dive bomber attacks. Taiho instead carried a specialized armored flight deck intended to resist major bomb hits and protect flight operations, though it did not make the ship immune to air attack or sinking. The more decisive choice was the hurricane bow. Earlier, carrier flight decks stood on open pillars over the forward hull, leaving the hangar partly exposed. Taiho's bow was integrated into the flight deck, sealing the forward hangar behind a solid steel face. The goal was practical: keep heavy weather out and protect aircraft inside during severe Pacific conditions. What the naval engineers did not realize was that the same sealed volume would also trap the danger produced by damaged aviation fuel systems. The defensive logic that strengthened Taiho against certain external threats also made gasoline vapor far harder to vent once it entered the ship. That design met its fatal test on June 19, 1944. The American submarine Albacore slipped through the Japanese screen and fired a torpedo spread at the carrier. In a desperate split-second act, pilot Sakio Komatsu, who had just launched from Taiho, saw the wakes and deliberately crashed his aircraft into one torpedo to stop it. One weapon still struck the starboard side abreast the forward number 1 elevator, close to the aviation gasoline storage spaces. The damage looked minor for a ship of Taiho's scale. Submarine commander James Blanchard did not believe he had sunk her because the carrier absorbed the hit, kept speed, and steamed away. Below decks, however, an invisible failure sequence had begun. The torpedo impact damaged aviation gasoline tanks and piping, allowing seawater, fuel oil, and aviation gasoline to collect in the forward elevator well. In the warm enclosed hangar, the mixture vaporized. Heavier than air gasoline fumes pooled downward and spread through the ship. To restore flight operations, the crew planked over the forward elevator opening so aircraft could cross the gap, unintentionally reducing one of the clearest escape paths for vapor. The ventilation system was then run at high capacity, but instead of clearing the danger, it carried gasoline fumes into compartments, passageways, living spaces, and machinery areas. For 6.5 agonizing hours, the carrier continued to steam away from the battle area, its crew entirely unaware that they had turned their flagship into a massive fuel air bomb. The mixture of gasoline vapor and oxygen inside the sealed structural envelope eventually reached a critical tipping point. The exact source of the final spark remains unknown today, but whether it was a dropped steel tool, an electrical short circuit, or a generator arc, the ignition was absolute. The resulting confined vapor explosion was catastrophic, not because it can be cleanly measured against a torpedo blast, but because it erupted inside the armored structure that was supposed to protect the ship. Because of that catastrophic internal blast, the physical condition of the wreck today is drastically different from what deep ocean researchers usually hunt for. When scientists and naval historians look for a sunken World War II warship, they typically calibrate their sonar equipment to search for a large, cohesive acoustic shadow returning from the flat seabed, indicating a relatively intact hull resting heavily on the bottom. But the remains of this ship do not likely form a single recognizable shape. Eyewitness survivor reports from nearby escort vessels described a horrifying, apocalyptic scene. The internal pressure of the vapor explosion was so violent that it buckled the armored flight deck upward and blew out hangar sides and sections of hull plating in places extending below the waterline. The ship's armored envelope had not been neatly pierced from the outside. It had been torn open by pressure from within. When the flagship finally slipped beneath the surface, with the exact death toll still disputed, she went down as a burned, flooded, and badly damaged warship, not as the untouched steel monument imagined by legend. The explosion almost certainly left Taiho gravely damaged, but without a confirmed survey, the exact condition of the wreck cannot be known. Any later breakup during descent remains a possibility rather than a documented fact. The seabed in this specific region of the Philippine Sea lies upon the vast abyssal plain, dropping away to depths exceeding 16,000 feet. During the long, dark descent into the crushing pressure of the abyss, any surviving sealed compartments or trapped air pockets may have collapsed under pressure, adding damage that cannot yet be confirmed without seeing the wreck. What rests on the bottom today could be an intact but crippled hull, a heavily broken wreck, or a concentrated debris field. Until the site is found, all of those possibilities remain unconfirmed. This uncertainty changes the nature of any future search operation. Instead of assuming an 840-foot-long hull will cast a clean, unmistakable sonar shadow, searchers must allow for damaged structure, scattered debris, and seafloor features that could confuse the picture. This unique combination of extreme physical fragmentation, massive abyssal depth, and a wandering debris path created an impossible mystery that eventually defeated the most capable deep-water explorers in the world. For decades, the exact location of the war grave remained nothing more than a simple, wildly inaccurate guess on a map. The sinking coordinates originally recorded by the American submarine were entirely useless for a modern search grid because the Japanese carrier had continued to steam away at high speed for 6.5 hours after the initial torpedo hit. Furthermore, the Japanese fleet was actively executing evasive zigzag maneuvers while retreating, meaning the actual point where the ship exploded and sank was miles away from the initial point of attack. To find the wreck today, an expedition would need to map a staggering amount of the Philippine Sea at depths that routinely crush conventional electronic equipment. Publicly available records do not confirm that RV Petrol carried out a dedicated Taiho search in this area. The vessel is, however, documented as having found other deep wartime wrecks, including Japanese carriers off Midway in 2019. This specific search team possessed the most advanced deep ocean autonomous underwater vehicles on the planet, utilizing robotic machines specifically designed to fly just above the abyssal plain and bounce side-scan sonar across the dark bottom. They were the very same team that had successfully located numerous impossibly deep, lost warships around the world, proving their technology worked. What can be said with confidence is narrower. The Philippine Sea is a demanding, deep water search area, and any attempt to locate a damaged carrier at abyssal depth would require sustained mapping, favorable weather, and high-quality sonar coverage. Without a publicly documented expedition report, claims about unreadable files, failed search lines, or emergency recovery of equipment should be treated as unconfirmed. After Paul Allen's death in 2018, RV Petrol still continued major discoveries in 2019. The program was later placed in long-term moorage in 2020 because of pandemic-related operational challenges, and the vessel was eventually sold to the U.S. Navy in 2022. Today, no publicly announced dedicated expedition is known to be returning to that stretch of water to finish the search for Taiho. Even if a private deep-sea salvage company stumbled upon the wreck tomorrow, it would not become a salvage prize. As a sunken Japanese naval vessel and a likely military grave, Taiho should be treated as sovereign immune state property. Recovery, disturbance, or intrusive entry would require Japanese consent. The protection is legal and ethical, not a literal boundary drawn around every piece of steel on the seafloor. Today, the commonly cited approximate wartime position lies roughly 400 nautical miles west-southwest of Guam, in nothing but open, rolling ocean. There are no navigational markers, no warning buoys, and no shallow water hazards to indicate where the mighty flagship met its end. The groundbreaking architectural design that was meant to make the ship invincible ultimately caused its total destruction, trapping the volatile, invisible fumes that tore its armored hull apart from the inside. The men who died with her may still lie with whatever remains of Taiho on the seabed, swallowed by the crushing, freezing pressure of the abyssal plain. This ship has largely faded from immediate public memory, overshadowed by other famous wartime vessels, whose intact, upright remains have been brilliantly illuminated by modern submersible lights and high-definition cameras. But this specific vessel remains entirely untouched by light, sonar, or human eyes since the summer of 1944. The massive steel footprint of the most heavily armored carrier in the Imperial Japanese fleet still lies waiting in the black water, having outlasted its enemies, outlasted the conflict, and successfully defeated the most advanced machines ever sent to find it.